black woman in her 40s, driving a silver SUV through a quiet southern town. Within minutes, she is dragged out, handcuffed, taunted by police who think she is just an easy target. But what they don't know, who she is, and her silence, calm, unwavering, will expose every lie, every abuse, and bring their entire police department to its knees. This is more than a story, it is a warning. Stay with us, because what happens next will change the way you view power forever. And if you love powerful stories like this, be sure to subscribe and join us on this journey. The southern noon hit like fire. Heat waves shimmered off the narrow main street of a small town where nothing much ever seemed to happen. The asphalt rippled, storefronts sagged with age: a grocery, a tailor, a lonely gas pump. People sat in wooden chairs on their porches, iced tea sweating in their hands, watching traffic creep by as though every passing car were an event in itself. That was when the silver SUV appeared. It didn't roar. It didn't rush. It slid down the road with the kind of steady grace that drew every eye. Sunlight scattered off the windshield, so bright it forced people to squint. Behind the wheel sat a black woman in her 40s. No makeup thick enough to hide under the heat, just a simple white blouse, dark jeans, her hair tied back. But she carried herself with the kind of presence that made you look twice. Her back was straight, her gaze sharp. She didn't need to try, her very existence unsettled the rhythm of the street. Her name was Elise Carter. Not that anyone here knew it. To them, she was simply a woman who didn't belong, driving a car too polished, too expensive, too foreign. For this town. At the corner, 2 patrol cars were already parked. Radios crackled inside. Silver SUV, black female. Plate doesn't match the area. A chuckle followed. Easy pick. Let's have some fun. The flash of red and blue tore across the street. Sirens screamed, shattering the drowsy calm. Heads turned. Kids stopped their game of street ball. Elise pulled smoothly to the curb. No panic. No hesitation. She shut the engine off and stepped out. The air hit her like a furnace. She placed her hands lightly on the hood, the heat of the steel biting into her skin. Around her neck, a thin silver chain glinted, and for the briefest second, a faint green pulse of light flickered across it, so quick it could have been a trick of the sun. A young officer swaggered forward, pulling off his sunglasses with deliberate slowness. His smirk widened. "This car doesn't fit someone like you. Step away, now." The cluster of uniforms behind him broke into laughter. The sound carried down the block, raw and mean, echoing off storefront windows. Elise didn't answer. Her face stayed calm, her eyes fixed straight ahead. That silence unsettled him more than anger would have. He shoved her shoulder, waiting for a reaction. Nothing. Not fear. Not defiance. Just stillness. The cuffs snapped tight around her wrists. Metal clinked against metal. People across the street whispered. A teenager lifted his phone and started recording. On a porch, an old woman shook her head. "Seen this too." "Many times," she murmured. Then softer, "But something about her, it ain't the same." Sunlight struck her chain again. The pulse of green light flared once more before vanishing. They pushed her into the patrol car, inside the station. Elise sat upright in the interrogation room. The fluorescent bulbs buzzed overhead, cold and merciless. A half-filled form lay on the desk. Name, Jane Doe. Officers lounged by the wall, arms crossed, tossing cheap jokes back and forth to fill the air. They laughed because silence pressed in too heavy. They laughed because she gave them nothing. In the records office, a rookie tapped her information into the system. The screen froze. A red banner scrolled across. "Access denied." He frowned. Tried again. The same result. Tried a third time. His account locked. A warning flashing across the monitor. Unauthorized search. Notification sent. His pulse quickened. This wasn't a glitch. This was Federal. He looked through the glass. Elise sat motionless, wrists bound, hands folded neatly on the metal table. But he couldn't shake the feeling that her eyes, calm, steady, were already waiting for him to realize exactly what he had just stumbled into. Down the hall, his fellow officers kept laughing, but the sound was thin now, brittle. The kind of laughter that cracked at the edges. Elise finally lifted her chin. A small movement, almost nothing. But in that instant, the entire room seemed to shift. Her silence said more than words. You think you're in control, but you've been on trial since the moment you touched me. The fluorescent lights flickered, buzzing in the heavy stillness. And part one closed not with her voice, but with the weight of everything she hadn't said, hanging in the air like a storm about to break. The station smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, too bright, too sterile, making every shadow sharp. The place wasn't large, just a county building with old linoleum floors and walls painted a weary beige, but to the officers who worked there, it had always felt like their fortress. That illusion was already fraying. Elise Carter sat alone at the metal table, her hands cuffed in front of her. Her posture hadn't changed since the street. Back straight, shoulders set, eyes forward. She didn't plead. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She didn't even blink much. The silence pressed harder with every passing minute. Across the glass, 3 officers watched. She thinks she's untouchable, one muttered. Wait till she hits county, another said, his laugh brittle. County eats people like her alive. But none of them stepped into the room. It was the rookie Officer Daniels who couldn't sit still. He was only 23, hair too long for regulations, still carried the nervous energy of someone who hadn't yet learned how to mask fear with swagger. He tried the system again, his fingers tapping too fast against the keyboard. The words blared back at him, access restricted, federal clearance, required. His throat dried. Federal, civilian records didn't carry that label, not ever, he didn't. Tell the others what the screen had done after the 3rd attempt. He didn't dare. The notification had been automatic, and he had glimpsed just enough before it locked him out. Search flagged. Report forwarded to Washington. He swallowed hard and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his palms against his uniform pants. He glanced again through the glass. She was waiting for him. He could feel it. In the interrogation room, Sergeant Cole finally pushed through the door. He was a thick man, late 50s, face sunburned, jaw heavy from years of chewing tobacco. He tossed a thin file onto the table, the papers barely covering a single page. Name? He demanded. Elise didn't answer. He tapped the file with one thick finger. We'll just keep you as Jane Doe, that's fine. Paperwork don't care what you're called. Her gaze lifted, cool and unwavering. For a flicker of a second, Cole shifted in his stance. He hated that. He leaned in close, his breath sour with coffee and chew. You're not in charge here, lady. You're nothing but a line in a file, you understand me? Her silence said otherwise. Cole straightened, his face darkening. Fine, you wanna play? Let's play. He shoved back from the table, storming out. The door clanged shut behind him. Down the hall, Daniels whispered, Sarge, maybe we should— Shut it, Cole snapped. System glitches all the time. You mark her down as unknown. We move her along, end of story. But I said end of story. The older officers laughed, slapping Daniels on the back, trying to wash the unease away with noise. But the rookie couldn't shake it. Glitches didn't forward reports to Washington. Glitches didn't lock down access at 3 failed attempts. He looked again through the glass. Elise hadn't moved. But he swore God, he swore her eyes found his. Not angry, not pleading, just waiting. Time stretched. The room grew hotter, though the air conditioning rattled overhead. One officer cracked his knuckles. Another tapped his boot against the wall. Their bravado was thinning. Elise rolled her shoulders back, a small motion, but it landed like a thunderclap. For nearly an hour she had been stone still, and that single adjustment of posture carried weight. Her chin lifted, her spine seemed taller, as though she had declared without words, "Time isn't running out for me, it's running out for you." Who the hell is she? One officer muttered. No one answered. The door slammed open again. Cole strode in, face flushed. In his hand was a body cam. He plugged it into the monitor, muttering about filing the footage before anyone asked. Error screens filled the display. Files corrupted. Segments missing. Cole cursed under his breath. Piece of junk. He tried another. The same result. Not a glitch this time. The footage wasn't there. It had been erased. One officer laughed nervously. Guest tech's not on our side today. Cole's eyes narrowed. He knew better. His voice dropped low. This isn't a malfunction. Someone scrubbed it clean. The room stiffened. Without body cam footage, they couldn't rewrite the story, couldn't bury the truth. Their shield had been stripped away. Daniels finally spoke, his voice cracking. Maybe we should call this in. Something doesn't add up. The silence that followed was heavier than a shout. They all knew he was right, but saying it aloud meant admitting it. And none of them wanted to do that. Back in the room, Elise shifted at last. She leaned forward, the cuffs clinking softly against the steel table. Her voice, when it came, was low and calm, but it cut deeper than a scream. Do you know what happens when you cross the wrong line? Every officer froze. The words weren't angry. They weren't even a threat. They carried the weight of certainty, as if the outcome had already been written. Cole forced a laugh. You think you can scare us with riddles? You're nobody here. Elise tilted her head, her eyes narrowing just slightly. Nobody doesn't trigger restricted databases. Nobody doesn't erase body cam footage in real time. Her words were precise, surgical, undeniable. The laughter died. The door burst open. Lieutenant Harris stepped in, phone pressed to his ear. His face was pale, his hand trembling as he motioned Cole into the hall. Voices carried back through the thin walls harsh, hurried whispers. State Attorney's Office. High priority detainee. Release immediately. Cole's voice rose. We don't even have her name. The line cut. Him off. Cold. Final dot. When Harris returned, his eyes darted anywhere but Elise. He didn't have to say the words out loud. The order had been clear. Release her. Inside, Elise remained still. She hadn't demanded freedom. She hadn't argued innocence. She simply sat, calm as ever, watching the panic rise in the room like water in a sinking ship. Her silence was no longer her shield. It was her weapon. And as the officers glanced uneasily at one another, the truth settled in, sharp as glass. They hadn't arrested a victim. They had walked straight into a trap. The station had always felt invincible to the men who worked there. 4 walls, a badge on the chest, a town too small and too afraid to question them. But that illusion was unraveling, thread by thread. The first thread snapped when Lieutenant Harris came back into the room, face pale, lips pressed tight. He didn't meet anyone's eyes as he muttered, "Orders are to release her, immediately." Sergeant Cole's jaw locked. His pride burned hotter than the southern sun. Hell no, nobody calls my house and tells me what to do. Not the state, not anyone. He jabbed a finger toward Elise, still seated calmly at the table. She's ours. She doesn't leave until I say she does. But even as the words left his mouth, a sharp knock echoed down the hallway. Then another. Heavy, deliberate. The front desk officer stumbled in, his voice cracking. "Sergeant, you need to see this." Cole shoved past him, Harris on his heels. The other officers followed, boots striking the linoleum too loud, too fast. And then they froze. The lobby was filling. Dark suits, crisp ties, badges flashing in the fluorescent light. Men and women moved with calm precision, their presence suffocating not because they shouted, But because they didn't need to federal back in the interrogation room, Elise rose slowly. The cuffs still bound her wrists, but she stood with the composure of someone far freer than the men who had shackled her. Her eyes swept across the officers who lingered at the doorway. Wide-eyed now, their earlier laughter shriveled into silence. She spoke quietly, her voice cutting through the air like glass. "I gave you every chance to stop yourselves. But you insisted." An agent stepped forward, unlocked the cuffs in one smooth motion. The metal clattered onto the table, the sound echoing like a verdict. Elise straightened her sleeves with deliberate calm. From her pocket, she drew a leather case. She didn't slam it down. She didn't need to. The badge inside spoke for itself. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Assistant Director, Civil Rights Division. No one moved. The sergeant's mouth opened, but words failed him. The arrogance that had fueled him on the street, in this very room, collapsed under the weight of who stood before him. "You profiled me. You mocked me. You fabricated charges." Elise's tone was even, measured. Each word landed like a hammer. "And now you've handed me everything I need for a civil rights investigation that will dismantle this department piece by piece." Federal agents fanned out, moving through the station with clinical efficiency. Desk drawers yanked open, hard. Drives unplugged, boxes of files tagged and sealed. Voices were low, commands clipped. "Tag it, seal it, move it." The fortress was crumbling. Cole shoved his way back into the room, face red with fury. "You think calling in friends from high places scares me? This is our town, our rules." Elise turned her gaze on him, calm, steady, merciless. "Your rules ended the moment you put those cuffs on me." Her words had barely left her lips when another knock echoed through the building. The front doors opened wider, and more agents filed in, carrying equipment, evidence bags, even rolling carts stacked with binders. The lobby buzzed with clipped orders, the shuffle of paper, the clink of weapons being logged as evidence. Every sound hammered the truth deeper. The station wasn't theirs anymore. It was a crime scene. At the interrogation table, Elise gestured to one of her agents. He sat, a laptop down, the screen flickering to life. Footage filled the monitor, crisp, undeniable. The stop, the laughter, the shove, the cuffs. Every second had been captured. Multiple angles, high definition. The officers stared, disbelief etched across their faces. Their own body cams had failed them, but this was something else. Elise spoke, her voice steady. "Your cameras failed because they don't belong to you anymore. They belong to the public. They belong to the truth. And the truth is that this department has thrived on intimidation, not justice." No one argued. Their silence wasn't defiance now. It was fear. An agent rolled in a cart stacked high with binders. Labels stretched back years. Traffic stops, arrest logs, complaint forms. Elise rested her hand on the pile. "This isn't about today. This is about a pattern. A culture you built and protected." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. They knew what was buried in those pages: wrongful arrests, fabricated reports, complaints that vanished into locked drawers. Their shield, for so long, was now evidence. Daniels, the rookie, looked like the ground had dropped out beneath him. His career, barely started, was ending in the wreckage of the department's arrogance. His voice cracked. "Ma'am, what happens now?" Elise studied him, her gaze not unkind but unyielding. "What happens now is accountability. A federal task force will take over this precinct. Every file will be reviewed, every officer questioned, every victim heard." The word victim hung in the air, heavy, unshakable. Outside, news vans were already gathering. Cameras rolled as whispers spread. FBI sting operation, wrongful arrest, civil rights investigation. Reporters pressed forward as Elise stepped into the lobby, flanked by agents. Microphones rose. Questions flew. "Were you undercover? How long has this been planned? What happens to the officers involved? Her voice carried steady, deliberate, each word chosen like a scalpel. This was part of a federal oversight operation designed to monitor civil rights violations. Today confirmed what our data already suggested. Effective immediately, this precinct is under federal control. Officers found complicit will face charges. Victims will be contacted as part of a broader investigation. The phrase civil rights investigation rippled through the crowd like thunder. Back inside, officers sat hollow-eyed. Some muttered excuses, some sat in silence already knowing their careers were finished. Cole paced like a caged animal, but even. He felt the walls closing in. He tried one last protest, voice shaking with desperation. "You set us up. This is entrapment." Elise turned back, her gaze sharp. "Entrapment? No, this is exposure. We didn't force you to racially profile me on a public street. We didn't tell you to invent charges or scrub footage. Those were your choices. We just made sure the world could see them." Her voice was calm, but the precision of her words cut deeper than anger ever could. As agents began escorting officers out, Miranda warnings echoed in the halls, the same words these men had once recited with smug authority. Now they heard them as prisoners. The irony burned. Elise stood in the center of it all, steady and unshaken. She hadn't needed to raise her voice. She hadn't needed to flex her authority. She had simply waited, and arrogance had done the rest. The fortress of the county station, once so proud, now lay in ruins. And for the first time in decades, the people of that small southern town would see what accountability looked like under the blazing American sun. By late afternoon, the precinct that had once pulsed with swagger stood hollow. Desks sat empty, files boxed and tagged, officers escorted out in chains. The echo of boots, once heavy with authority, now rang like the sound of surrender. The townspeople gathered outside, drawn by sirens, whispers, and the sudden swarm of news vans. Some stood with arms crossed, suspicious of the spectacle. Others let out quiet sighs of relief. For years, they had lived with fear. Traffic stops that turned hostile, complaints that vanished, justice that never came. And now, in one searing afternoon, they were watching the fortress collapse. Elise Carter stepped into the sunlight. She was no longer cuffed, no longer anonymous. She moved with calm, deliberate grace, flanked by agents in dark suits. Cameras angled forward, microphones surged, voices collided. Were you undercover? Was this a sting operation? What happens to the officers now? Elise didn't raise her voice, but the crowd fell silent anyway. This was never about one traffic stop, she began, her words measured. This was about a culture of misconduct. Racial profiling, fabricated charges, suppressed evidence, practices that have no place in American policing. Flashes erupted. Pens scratched furiously across notepads. Effective immediately, she continued. This precinct falls under federal oversight. Officers complicit in civil rights violations will face charges. Victims silenced for too long will be contacted directly. Their voices will be heard. The phrase civil rights investigation cut through the noise like a bell. Reporters knew the weight of those words. Across the country, they would ripple like thunder. Inside the station, Sergeant Cole sat slumped in a chair, wrists shackled now by the very steel he had wielded so easily. His face, once red with rage, was pale. He muttered something under his breath. Entrapment, setup, unfair. But the words sounded hollow even to him. Elise returned briefly, her eyes cool as she regarded the man who had shoved her on the street hours earlier. "You say this was entrapment," she said softly, "but we didn't tell you to see skin before humanity. We didn't tell you to laugh while you mocked. Annie, those were your choices. And now those choices are evidence." Her words landed heavier than a gavel. Cole looked away. As dusk approached, the station transformed into something unrecognizable. Every drawer emptied, every hard drive imaged, every weapon logged. The fortress had become a crime scene. The walls that had once sheltered arrogance now contained nothing but silence and fear. In the town square, people whispered. A man who'd lost his son to a questionable stop muttered, "Finally." A mother clutched her child tighter. Old men who had shaken their heads at injustice for decades now stood straighter, as though the air itself had shifted. For years they believed nothing could change. But Elise Carter had walked into their town, sat in silence while arrogance dug its own grave, and turned that silence into a weapon sharper than any badge. Later that evening, under the glow of floodlights and TV cameras, Elise stood at a podium. The backdrop was stark. Federal banners, agents standing firm, a row of microphones bristling like spears. "This was never about me," she told the crowd. Her voice carried steady, deliberate. "This was about accountability. Law enforcement is not a privilege, it is a responsibility. And when responsibility is abandoned, justice will find its way back." She paused, letting the words settle. Cameras zoomed in. The silence in the crowd was electric. Injustice hides in plain sight. It thrives when people believe they are powerless. But silence, when chosen wisely, can be strategy. Patience can be resistance. And truth, revealed at the right moment, can topple even the strongest facade. Her words rang across the square, through the microphones, into living rooms across America. Some heard them with hope, others with fear. But no one could ignore them. By nightfall, the precinct was sealed. Black SUVs rolled out of the lot, carrying officers once untouchable now under arrest. Residents stood in clusters beneath street lamps, murmuring disbelief, trading glances heavy with both relief and unease. The headlines lit up before dawn. FBI sting exposes corrupt police precinct. Civil rights investigation launched. But beneath the headlines, something deeper stirred. For the first time in decades, people felt that maybe, just maybe, the scales of justice could tip back toward balance. In her hotel room, Elise finally loosened the silver chain from her neck, the faint green pulse fading into stillness. She set it gently on the dresser and sank into a chair by the window. Outside, the town looked quiet, almost ordinary again. But she knew better. Nothing about today had been ordinary. Her phone buzzed. A message from Washington. "Well done. Prepare for expansion statewide." She exhaled, long and steady. The battle was just beginning. But tonight, she allowed herself one moment to rest, because in a single afternoon, one small southern town had learned a lesson the entire nation was about to confront. Power is not proven by force. It's proven by holding your ground calm, steady until the truth speaks louder than any badge. By dawn, the town was quieter than it had been in years. The precinct stood dark, windows blank, its once familiar glow of authority stripped away. Federal tape crossed the doors, sealing what was no longer a place of power but a crime scene frozen in silence. Yet the silence didn't last long. Across America, screens lit up with the story. Morning anchors leaned forward at their desks, eyes sharpened by the weight of breaking news. FBI Assistant Director wrongfully detained in small southern town. Civil Rights Division launches statewide investigation. Hidden cameras capture corruption in broad daylight. Clips rolled Elise Carter, walking calmly in cuffs, the smirk of officers on the street, the unflinching silence in the interrogation room. And finally, the reveal, her badge gleaming under fluorescent light. The footage traveled faster than wildfire. By breakfast, millions had seen it. By noon, protests were forming outside courthouses. By night, it was a national reckoning. In Washington, the phones never stopped ringing. Senators demanded hearings, governors issued statements. Civil rights groups held press conferences, waving stills from the footage like banners of proof. "This is not an isolated incident," one activist declared on the steps of the Capitol. "This is a pattern, a system that has thrived unchecked. Elise Carter's silence exposed it, but she did not endure what countless others have endured without cameras, without badges, without federal backup. This is about all of them. The crowd roared. Chants lifted into the air, echoing against marble columns dotting the town itself. The shift was slower, more fragile. Some residents defended their officers, calling it a setup, a trick. But others, those who had lived through years of intimidation, felt a strange lightness, like chains loosening. On the porch of the grocery store, an old man whispered, "Thought I'd never see the day." A mother, tears streaking her cheeks, told reporters how her son had been arrested for nothing but walking home late at night. For the first time, she believed someone might listen. The town square, once a place of hushed resentment, filled with people carrying signs. Justice means accountability. Truth over power. We saw it too. For Elise, the storm was relentless. She moved from one briefing to another, her name now spoken in every newsroom, her face broadcast on every network. Some painted her as a hero. Others called her reckless. A few branded her arrogant, claiming she had baited the officers. But Elise never once defended herself. She didn't need to. The footage did that for her. When asked in an interview why she hadn't spoken sooner, she answered with the same calm that had carried her through the interrogation room. Because sometimes silence speaks louder than any words. I wanted the system to reveal itself, and it did. The interviewer paused, visibly unsettled. Then not a dot in the weeks that followed. Federal teams poured across the state, combing through departments once considered untouchable. Files surfaced, complaints long buried unearthed. Wrongful arrests overturned, officers indicted. Precincts dissolved, the headlines piled up. Civil rights sweep expands to 4 counties. Dozens of officers suspended pending investigation. Families of victims demand reparations. Each day, the scope widened. What began as one wrongful stop in one town had become a movement. Not everyone celebrated. In small towns, bar conversations turned bitter. "She embarrassed the badge," some muttered. "Made us look weak." Others swore she had been planted. A setup by Washington elites. But the truth was too visible now to ignore. The footage, the files, the sheer scale of evidence, it couldn't be explained away. One night, weeks after the arrest, Elise stood again before cameras, this time in Washington. The Capitol loomed behind her, its dome lit against the night sky. She didn't speak of herself. She spoke of the people who hadn't had cameras, who hadn't had federal titles, who hadn't been able to sit in silence and wait for justice to reveal itself. "Power unchecked is not power," she said. "It is corruption. And corruption, left in the dark, grows roots. But today, we shine a light. Not for me, for every family silenced, for every victim forgotten, for every voice drowned in laughter that thought it couldn't be challenged." Her voice rose not loud, but steady, unyielding. Justice does not roar. Sometimes it waits, sometimes it watches. And then, when the moment is right, it arrives without doubt about where it stands. The crowd erupted. Across the country, living rooms fell silent as those words cut through screens. By the time Elise returned to her office, stacks of files waiting, she knew the fight was far from over. Investigations would stretch on for years. Politicians would try to twist the narrative. Departments would resist. But she had seen something in that small southern town that told her change was possible. Not the collapse of a precinct that was paperwork and evidence, but the way people's eyes had shifted, the way silence had cracked open, the way truth had broken through swagger. And that, she thought, was worth every second of waiting. As she looked out over Washington from her office window, the city lights flickering below, Elise Carter understood that her story had already become something larger than herself. She was no longer just a woman in the silver SUV. She was the proof that silence, wielded with patience, could bring down walls built on arrogance. The nation was awake now, and there would be no going back. The city never truly slept. But Elise Carter finally allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. She sat by the window of her D.C. office, the Capitol dome glowing faintly in the distance. Below, the city hummed sirens far off, headlights threading through the night. Stacks of files filled her desk, each folder stamped with names, dates, complaints. Each one a story waiting to be told, a voice waiting to be heard. But for the first time in weeks, Elise wasn't looking at the files. She was looking at the reflection in the glass. The same woman who had walked into a southern town, silent under the sun, silent under handcuffs, silent while arrogance wrote its own indictment. Her silence had become the story. The phone on her desk buzzed once, twice. She let it ring. For years she had lived by urgency, every call a crisis. But tonight, she let it pass. Her mind drifted back to the faces she had seen outside the precinct that day. The old woman shaking her head. The teenager with his phone raised. The mother holding her child closer. They had watched her not because they knew who she was, but because they saw something they had longed for. A crack in the wall that had hemmed them in for too long. Elise reached for the silver chain she had set on the desk. She ran her thumb over it, the faint green stone cool against her skin. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't even special tech. It was simply a keepsake, a reminder. From her father, a man who had once told her, "Power isn't about how loud you speak. It's about how long you can stand still while the world tries to push you down." She smiled faintly. He'd been right. On the street, when the officers laughed, when the cuffs bit into her skin, when the interrogation room pressed hot and stale, every second had been a test of stillness. And every second, she had let them believe they were in control. Until the moment the truth arrived. The nation now saw her as a symbol. Protesters carried her face on placards. Commentators debated her strategy on primetime panels. Politicians invoked her name in speeches. Some called her brave. Others called her dangerous. She had expected both. But Elise knew something the headlines didn't capture. This was never about her. It was about the mother who could finally speak her son's name without fear of dismissal. About the rookie officer who now understood silence could be heavier than bravado. About the town that had learned, in one blistering afternoon, that badges could bend under the weight of truth. She closed her eyes. The work ahead would be brutal. More files, more hearings, more resistance. The system never surrendered easily. But she felt no fear. Only resolve. Because in the end, justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it waited. Sometimes it wore a white blouse, sat in a bare room, and let arrogance destroy itself. And when the moment came, silence spoke louder than any badge. Elise Carter opened her eyes, the city's reflection shining back at her. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. In the end, Elise Carter proved something timeless. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it sits in silence until the truth speaks louder than any badge. That day, a precinct fell, but something greater rose. The reminder that accountability still matters. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. Because here, we tell the stories that reveal not just power, but the truth.